Hi, we're Andy and Lina, two of the Bellroy co-founders, and what have I missed is a question we ask each other often as we explore ideas around business, culture, impact, and personal development. This is a space where we can share some of that exploration. Here's Lina to kick off the episode.
We describe our culture as smart people with good intentions who get shit done. It's 9 fairly simple words, but they carry a lot of weight. And today we thought it'd be fun to unpack that and really dive into the 3 elements that put that together. So smart people, good intentions, and get shit done.
So when we were a few years into our journey, we realised that the shape of person that could thrive at Bellroy was a little different to in other types of jobs and roles. And we'd started to try and unpack that a little. And as we were reading lots of different sources, research, all sorts, we found a quote from Sue Desmond-Hellmann, who at that time was the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And that quote struck a chord with us. She said, "Progress happens when smart, dedicated people translate good intentions into concrete realities." And that struck something. And we thought, well, that's a pretty good quote, but can we even unpack that and crystallize it? And that was where we came up with those 3 key elements: smart people with good intentions who get shit done.
And I think what's interesting when you sort of start a baby company, all the way back 13 years ago, you don't necessarily think about making explicit how we're going to work or what's the culture going to be like. You sort of turn up, solve every problem half badly, get it all done, but you don't really think about what's it going to look like when we need to be able to describe this thing, and the way to describe it isn't going to be, well, it's sort of just like us and the way we work. And it feels to me that when we got to about 40 people, and I think at another time we'll talk about this idea of the stages that businesses go through is sort of interesting. But, for this little snippet, I felt like when we got to 40 people, we sort of switched over from being able to have a direct relationship with everyone in the company. And so we didn't really need to make things explicit because we could just do it all at the at the lunch table and over conversations and how we worked. But at about that 40 people mark, we had to start making things explicit so that they could be passed on and other people could talk about them. And I think that was really the vibe of where making this part of the culture, smart people, good intentions, get shit done, felt like it was quite important to make it explicit at that point.
I think that's right. And I think part of it, going back kind of to that point, part of it was we wanted the fewest elements possible to leave the most room for diversity. So I think there are companies that look for MBA graduates from prestigious universities. There are companies that, without a deliberate strategy, will start finding people that remind them of themselves or that have this cardboard cutout vibe. And so I think in doing that and thinking back to that, we show it as a Venn diagram, it was trying to leave a lot of room for diversity outside, but deciding on a few clear elements that needed to be there for someone to thrive in Bellroy.
Yeah, fair enough. I often think about, it's just based on your comment to do with sort of MBAs. Of all of the things I know about our team, actually the thing I know the least is if they have a university degree and what that is. I feel like that's the thing that I kind of know, where they're from and what their interests are and who their kids are and like where they worked before. And I feel like it's a diversion, but I feel like I have no idea what degrees people have.
I think, when we were appointing our lawyer general counsel, I think we wanted to make sure she had a degree.
I didn't actually check. Yeah. I assume she does. Yeah.
But I absolutely agree. I really don't know who has degrees and who doesn't.
Yeah.
But we do have a very rigorous recruitment process where we're trying to discover those elements. We're trying to discover if they do have smarts, if they do have good intentions beyond themselves, and if they are able to get shit done.
Yeah. So should we dive into sort of part one, smart people? And because I think that this one is probably the most, we're a little uncomfortable with that statement when left alone. And when we actually rewrite it, we often put an asterisk on the word smart, because I think it's the one that feels like, while Andy, you were talking about diversity and fostering diversity, well, what does it look like when we're actually saying the first line, the first two words are smart people, feels a little bit less diverse. So what we wanted to do was sort of dive into all three. And if we start with smart, I think for me, what feels interesting about smart versus not interesting is that it's really not about what your IQ is. But what we do recognize is to be able to get a job done well, you need to kind of have two processes that work for you. One is, how do you process information in the world and what's going on? How do you sort of bring it in, process it and understand it? And then how do you make decisions? And so for us, we kind of don't care what your IQ is, but when we think about the concept of smart, what we're looking for is, do you have some way of understanding what's going on in the world and processing the information in it and then converting that into action? And so for us, that's a bit more what we mean when we say smart. And it could be like you're really amazing at reading the room and that's how you're smart. Or you could love processing a spreadsheet of numbers, or you could be a wordsmith and really be able to take in concepts reading essays. All of those things are smart for us. And so we kind of don't care how you do it, but you need some way of doing it.
I think that's exactly right. And what's interesting about it, you'd said the two main processes. For those processes to stay good and accurate, you also need a feedback loop. And it's that they have to stay relevant. And one of the things we can see with people that have what you would traditionally call high intelligence growing up, often it can create a separation from reality. You can see certain types of people that come with very strong mental hardware processing capacity don't have feedback loops that mean their mental software keeps getting debugged and keeps getting updated and doing that. There's sort of an arrogance that sometimes comes with it, a separation from reality and people. And
so it would be fair to say we're kind of much less interested in the hardware of the thing, but the software that's running and how that updates might be another way of describing a way to kind of parallel for what smart could look like.
I really agree.
So we thought that as we sort of went through these, it would also be useful to talk about some examples of what that kind of looks like for us, or where would you see the smart people turning up. And I think, Andy, you sort of hinted at this as we were leading into talking about smart people, but that our recruitment process, it's definitely not one that happens by accident. It's very much designed to try and understand how people approach the world and what they do as they're approaching it. I think we don't want to necessarily go through our whole process and how it runs, but needless to say, it's not sort of a 1 hour chat to see, is this the kind of person we'd be friends with? Exactly. So I feel like our recruitment process is really the beginning step of sort of working out, is this a person who might actually fit in with this culture within that context? I think it was interesting then that you also mentioned this idea of having feedback loops, because it felt like being able to notice when you're wrong or when a colleague's wrong and maybe has to or should change their mind or has changed their mind, and being able to call that out. That feels to me like another type of smart, because I think it's a little bit higher level than actually doing a task, but sort of having the perspective of, what does this am I actually right in this task and how's it going? And I feel like when I also think about smart people, I very much imagine someone who is sort of watching the world they're in, working out when they didn't get it right, when they did, working out when it's time to update, change their mind, and like calling that out. And it felt like that is another really important thing that I think you would see happening at Bellroy, that is a good articulation of the smart people piece.
I really agree. And I think even subtle shifts on words, sometimes like you'll hear people say, oh, they're always the smartest person in the room. And to me, I just cringe when I hear that sort of thing, because it's like, well, in which fields, which experience, how have their mental models been built? What's happening there? I think we care deeply about expertise, but I think there's less of a like, oh, they're the expert, whatever they say goes. And so it is this dynamic of having the humility to wrestle with ideas, to probe, probabilities, to do all these things. It is so important that is part of the smarts that we're looking for. Yeah,
that makes sense. So should we move on to the second part of our description of our culture, which is good intentions? So this one I feel like it's kind of much more straightforward to say this is the thing that we really value. I think Google were one of the early companies, it feels like, who were kind of out there talking about something like you need to be a good person to be in the company with their don't be evil. And I do remember as we were sort of young 20-somethings, we were quite captivated by that idea of a company sort of saying, no, actually, you have to be a good person. And I suppose for us, we were probably kids of the 80s. And, I think the vibe of the 80s was not quite, you have to be a good person.
Gordon Gekko.
Yeah.
I think that's right. And I think the way we describe what a good person is, though, it's less about the person. It's more about the intentions. We say good intentions. But I think there's many types of good intentions. And I think one of the things we're doing is trying to unpack that a little and say they need to be thinking of things beyond themselves. But then they also need to find goal alignment with what Bellroy is trying to move towards and our vision of a vibrant future. I think there's lots of visions of a future that some of them prioritize one form of life over another. Others we talk about our stewardship loop as being people, animals, and the planet all sustaining each other. I think our vision of what good intentions are and moving towards a better world, I think it's important that there's some degree of overlap with that sort of a vision.
Yeah.
Where some might think that a good vision for the world is that all the humans leave it and nature goes back to the way it was. They're good intentions, but they're not intentions.
I think we like the people too much to have that vision, right?
That's right.
I mean, we like the other two as well, but the people are too important within the equation.
Totally. And so there needs to be this overlap with like our vision of good and good intentions needs to have some overlap with their vision of good and good intentions. And we need to see people that I always liked a definition of a douchebag is someone that always believes you're there to serve their goals.
Right.
And it's like you can still have douchebags that get a lot done in the world that is good for the world.
Yeah.
But I think always we're looking for folks that come in and look for a bit of goal alignment. They're trying to understand, well, what are these people driving at? Does it feel good? Can we find the goals we align on and work together on those goals rather than the other ones? So I think even good intentions needs a little unpacking to say there is a form of goal alignment and there's a form of caring about things beyond yourself and your own immediate needs. I think there's a few elements in there.
I mean, it's interesting that for me, that actually, when I think of good intentions, there's a really strong two approaches to it. It feels like the personal, who are you as a person? How do you go about the world? What are you trying to achieve? Do you leave things better than how you found them? Like that part of it feels very much like the like one beginning part of good intentions. And then I think the other part is how do you contribute to sort of a bigger view of what perhaps Bellroy is trying to achieve, or, what's your view of how the world might be able to work better? And I don't know, I feel like there's maybe the micro and the macro within that good intentions piece, and both of them feel important.
I think that's really right. And the second element you spoke about is, you meet people that go around saying, oh my God, people are so stupid. And it's like, that's this inherently pessimistic view of humans. Mm-hmm. And I think for us that good intentions is also believing in the good intentions of those around you, rather than thinking they're fools and idiots because they don't see the world the way you do.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that vibe, it is a almost philosophy as well of believing in the good in others.
Yeah.
And then if we can curate an environment that only has people that we believe are quite goal aligned with good intentions, then it's also asking everyone to believe that people aren't doing that for some evil reason. There's no evil master plan. There's no conspiracy about them. It's like everyone you're working with has good intentions. Now you need to be optimistic. You need to believe in them. You need to give them the benefit of, the goodwill and the faith that they're actually trying to do good things here. And maybe you're just not seeing this problem the same way.
Right. And thinking about how that shows up. So when we were talking about smart people, we use the example of what you would see in Bellroy as you might find somebody saying they were wrong about a thing, or they'd changed their mind about a thing. That within our culture, unfortunately, is inherently a vulnerable position from the broader context of culture. And we try very hard to make it be that at Bellroy, it's not a vulnerable thing and it's very easy to do. But that's not what people turn up with. They turn up with a lot of baggage around admitting that they were wrong or that they've changed their mind. And so I think for us to be able to have it be true that we really value people changing their mind or calling out a colleague, actually the good intentions part is really important, that you have good intentions towards your colleagues to make it be that everybody can just always say the truth about what's going on, even if the consequences are huge. And like that's the time that it's most important. But it feels like you can get like the smart people part, and I'm sort of using the inverted commas with my fingers, but you can get the smart people part to have it be that people are willing to say, actually, I think this is wrong, we're making a bad decision, but you'll only create a context where people will be willing to do that and say that if there are good intentions within the culture.
I think that's exactly right. And I think other companies try for something like this with the no assholes rule or versions of this. And I think that is trying to create a space that it's still challenging, it still encourages growth, but it's safe in terms of the intentions are right. The intentions are heading in a good place. And so when we see behaviour that freezes people up, they can no longer bring their whole selves to work, that sort of thing, that is a massive threat to letting everyone else believe in the good intentions of each person there.
Yeah.
And so that's why we can't employ the douchebags or the assholes, because it seizes everyone else up from that state of being willing to be vulnerable or being willing to, say, I got that wrong, I need to update, here's what I'm going to change next time.
Yeah. Maybe a different example around what what our ask is, I guess, around good intentions is something like being a good Bellroy citizen or like a good teammate or a good co-worker. Sort of a very specific example is, I think, a thing that a lot of people here would recognize is the concept of interrupt levels. And so if you want to interrupt someone who's working, we talk about and ask that you do it in a way that is considerate to the work that they're doing, to the flow that they may or may not be in, and the urgency of the issue, so that you don't just think, oh, I need an answer. Bob can answer that question for me. I'll just walk up to Bob's desk and ask. But we ask people to think about not only their needs, but the needs of their colleagues in how they interact with each other. And we make that explicit. And that feels, again, like a request around the good intention space.
It's spot on. So, the interrupt levels are expect an email might be answered within a couple of days unless they're on leave and you get those notifications. A Slack might be answered within some hours. If someone's working with their headphones on, that is a clear sign that they're deep in work. If it needs to be more urgent, then it's the tap on shoulder or the phone call. And so there's a staged series of interrupt levels that is essentially saying if we can all agree on conventions, we can honour when people are in flow states, when they're deep in their work. And then if they're not, if they're doing low-level processing, hopefully their headphones are off and people know they can come up and tap them on the shoulder and have a convo.
And then it's that what you know is that if somebody interrupts you when you were doing something that you wished you weren't interrupted from, you know that they have actually thought about it for more than a moment and thought, no, actually, I think it's the right thing to do. And like maybe it was urgent or maybe it wasn't, and that actually doesn't matter. The thing that's important is, did the person actually think about it?
Yeah, that sounds spot on. Let's get on to getting shit done.
Yeah, I mean, this one feels like the most corporate-y of them all. You know, I think the smart people perhaps is a little bit controversial. The good intentions is, that's nice and fluffy. And then the get shit done kind of feels like, well, that's the thing that most businesses are probably going to claim they're trying to do, right?
I think so. And even in the way we think about it, we talk a lot about effectiveness over efficiency. The classic, there's many versions of the quotes around there's nothing less efficient than doing something efficiently that never needed being done. We talk a lot about effectiveness rather than efficiency in terms of it's a word that leaves more lateral thinking room, more can you come at the problem sideways? Can you dissolve the problem? What are all these habits and approaches that let you understand the goal, the objective you're going after, and then work out tactics and actions that let you kind of get there in the fastest, sensible way that doesn't break too many other things?
Yeah, and when I imagine the effectiveness over efficiency, which actually I think we had explicitly as a value in the culture before we'd articulated the get shit done, these three pieces. But it feels like effectiveness is always thinking about, does the output that this thing bring actually move the needle, move the whole thing along? Or are you versus efficiency, could you potentially be in a valley just, optimizing something small where actually what you need to do is climb the mountain and get out. And so it doesn't matter how many times you try and optimize the thing. And so I feel like efficiency feels good sometimes because it's always going to feel like you're doing something useful, better, more effective. Well, probably not more effective, but, useful, better, in a more organized way. If it doesn't actually change the outcome, move the needle, get you closer to the goal, then I think effectiveness is the thing that does that. So it's like, are you just in the local optima or are you actually going to change the outcome of the system?
I think that's spot on. And I think when we think about effectiveness, we think about both personal effectiveness as well as your effectiveness as part of a team. Mm-hmm. So both intra and extra. Do you want to talk to that a tiny bit?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, it's crazy how I feel like whenever I go to say something, it's like, oh, if I could pull on that model that we have not yet described. One of the things that we often think about is the different modes of work that somebody might need to do. And we should talk about it another time, but as some examples, there's sort of people management mode and technical skills mode and a few others that we think kind of describe the world of
work that needs being done.
The work that needs to happen. And I feel like when you're thinking about the personal lens of effectiveness, you're being very honest about which types of work can I make progress on within the context of a goal. And then you take a step out to the team lens and you say, okay, if we actually have this big goal to achieve, I can't progress the people work very much, but actually John could. And so he would be much better to do that piece. And then perhaps I feel like I could do a really good job of the technical work that needs to happen. So I could say, okay, I'll do that part. And it's sort of this balance between recognizing what are you going to contribute, but then how can you actually be really realistic about how you can contribute to a goal and understand what the whole team is actually going to be able to add as well. I don't think we've ever thought about that idea from that context before, and I'm not sure if that's what you were thinking, I would say, but anyhow,
and
there's that.
Concepts like comparative advantage.
I was thinking about comparative advantage as I started talking,
There are these ideas that we're trying to get things done as an organisation, and so it's like, are you the best one in the organisation to do this? Do you need a team around? Is there someone else that could do it more effectively? Who's a bottleneck at the moment? How do you pad that bottleneck and ease that constraint? So I think there's a lot there, but that's probably enough to talk. I think we could do a whole session on effectiveness. But what might be a bit fun is to talk about, okay, we have smart people, good intentions, getting shit done. What happens if one of those is missing?
Yeah, in each of the cases. So if you have good intentions and getting shit done, but you're missing the smarts.
So for this one, probably more relevant for those that understand the Australian context.
Or who've watched The Simpsons.
Or who've watched The Simpsons episode that references it. But we talk about cane toads. So Australia had a problem with a particular fly or beetle, and it was like, oh, I know cane toads work on those. So they introduced these cane toads from maybe it was South America or something.
I'm not sure.
And all of a sudden, cane toads don't have a natural predator in Northern Australia, and so they just run rampant. That was good intentions. They got a program going that dealt with the small parasite that they were trying to reduce, but the smarts weren't there.
And definitely got shit done because those cane toads did shit.
Did absolute shit. So I'm sure everyone's got sort of a relevant context version of cane toads in their country, region, space.
But the idea is that feels to me like it was an efficient solution to getting rid of the bugs, but actually it just made a bigger problem. And so it didn't ultimately bring about something effective for Australia. It just created a different problem. And I think without the smarts there, you can end up getting a thing done really fast, but actually it may not have been such a good thing to do.
Totally agree. I think the one where you're missing good intentions, that one's a bit easier, and I suspect everyone will know one of the references we sometimes talk about with this, where if you have the smarts, if you can get shit done, but the good intentions aren't there, I think we often think the Wolf of Wall Street.
Totally. And this is like we referenced the 80s corporate culture.
Greed is good, Gordon Gekko,
Hollywood
Wall Street.
Did such an amazing job of kind of describing. It's interesting that what emerges from that is an optimization of one thing, and not really recognizing the balance of making money versus people being happy, for example. And so it's interesting that with missing of the good, you can probably push an objective really far in one direction, but do you really want to do that? And perhaps you're not balancing the unintended consequences of pushing super hard in that direction.
I think that's right. And then the last one, what happens if you're missing getting shit done? I think we haven't quite got the perfect one, but you can imagine the bumbling university professor or the hopeless inventor working on the perpetual motion machine.
And like we're maybe declaring biases there. Yeah. We've probably double declared biases between the not recruiting the MBAs and the bumbling professor concept.
But there's smart folks, incredible care. They're trying to move the world's knowledge forwards, but they can just get lost on details. They can be working on the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. There's not an output. You can't see the traction.
Yeah.
And that issue just means it's almost wasted good resources if you're not actually moving the world forwards and actually getting stuff done.
Right. And this is perhaps an example where what getting stuff done in that case could much better look like is finding a partner who can help you do the bit that you can't get done. And so it's not like everybody needs to be, an execution powerhouse, but you need to recognize when you're not, so that you can have someone help you kind of get it out there. And if you've got an amazing idea, and it is an amazing idea, like it's really valuable, but you sort of sit in a room on your own, we can't enjoy all of that. And so you actually need to be getting it out into the world as well. And sort of that feels like the consequence of the get shit done piece not being there.
I really agree. And sometimes even in design team, we say some of the designers have a more natural inclination to sparkiness, these crazy ideas that see the world differently and do all of that. And others seem to have a more natural inclination towards progressing projects and moving them forward. And every day it moves. And we actually want both, but we just make sure that the teams are set up where those sparky, really interesting ideas then also have support or resources or other folks that know how to move them on and get them traction. And then you learn off each other, and the progressors get sparkier and the sparkies get more progressing.
Yeah.
And you grow and develop.
They actually feed off each other.
Now, I am aware we're getting close to the time we sort of set ourselves as wanting, but we've talked a lot about the sorts of folks we want to bring into Bellroy. But I think we then do also talk about like the responsibility of how we make sure they can thrive and setting up an environment that we nurture and we work hard on to make sure they can thrive.
Because actually smart people with good intentions who get shit done, like it's not like they're just falling out of the sky and you just have to stand outside the door and catch them. We sort of see it as our job to create an environment that's really tasty for that kind of person.
Absolutely. And I think there was the progress principle was this concept Teresa Amabile had spoken about, written a book about, some articles, where when they looked at what created incredibly satisfying work lives, there was a sort of summary line that we loved, that people feel like they're thriving, like they're living very fulfilling work lives when they get tangible progress towards meaningful goals. And we liked that, but we felt it was missing a bit. And so we put a comma on the end and wrote together. So it is tangible progress towards meaningful goals together. And I think our job is to set up an environment where they can get that. So you're taking in these smart people with good intentions who can get shit done, and then you're nurturing and fostering an environment that has, you can feel your traction, you can feel that tangible progress. There's not massive projects that take 10 years. They're broken into small chunks where you can feel progress, and they're towards meaningful goals. It's not just, can we make more money or can we do this one thing? It's like, we really believe in business as a force for good. We believe in shaping better ways, moving towards better. And then we believe it's better doing it together. Perhaps it's worth just talking about, all right, well, that sounds good, but how do we do that? What are some examples of doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when I think about those three areas, if we start with tangible progress, I think that we sort of have a couplet of organizational concepts that sort of play through there. One part is that we very much think about what are the ways we structure projects so that not only can we have the ship going forward in the direction that it's in, but occasionally we need to change the direction that the ship's sailing in, and how can we have it be that work is happening. And so we have an OKR program, objectives and key results, originally inspired, in fact, by a lot of sharing of how Google were doing their OKR program. But it means that when we're trying to actually change the direction of the ship, I think we have really deliberate processes to define those projects, specify the key results to know if we're moving in the right direction, and separate that work out from core business work, which is selling the products that hopefully our customers primarily use and love, and And so I think that when I think about tangible progress, it feels like one thing that we're really doing is making sure we're really explicit about, hey, here are the projects that we're doing that are going to move Bellroy into a new place, and have it not just be the same every day, because that doesn't feel very rewarding. I do think the other thing, though, that I feel like I see happening in so many of the teams is the concept of a retrospective. When we talk about tangible progress, I think you can only make progress when you're actually both looking forward at what you want to achieve, but looking backwards and finding where were the ways and processes and places where actually we got held back.
And we sometimes use the line, work on thinking, not just things. And that's a version of it. What was the thinking that went into that project? And as we retrospective on it, it's like, where did that thinking maybe not deliver everything we were hoping for or miss the mark?
Yeah, and where did we, and it might be that we didn't think about a thing early enough, or we didn't think about a thing with enough people. I mean, sometimes retros are lovely experiences as well, and it's like, we totally nailed that. We had that a couple of weeks ago with a little underwater promotion that we ran for some customers, and I remember at the very end of it, I was like, tell me when the retro's happening, because I just want to say this was so smooth and well done. So retros are not always unhappy places. They can be sort of times to say, hey, that really worked well. So meaningful goals is the second part. I don't know, Andy, do you want to sort of elaborate there?
We definitely have things like our Bellroy mission, inspire better ways to carry, use business as a force for good, help our crew and the world flourish. We have things like that. But actually right now, we feel like it's not good enough. Actually, at the moment, we're going back into our brand and re-clarifying just what our vision of a vibrant future is and how we believe we can get there and what it is. So I think this is a work that's always being refined and improved and iterated on. But I think we very clearly, we've been a B Corp since 2015. We very clearly are trying to work on better practices for the industry that we share across. We're trying to work on people, animal, and planet projects. We're doing these things, but it's not just meaningful goals for what the company's achieving. It's also within yourself. Do you feel growth and development? Do you feel like you're understanding the world better and better able to navigate it? Do you feel more empowered to pursue your own goals? I think all of these are versions of meaningful goals that we need to hold space for.
Right. And then the last part is our comma together, where it feels like, as I mean, that's a word that obviously has so much meaning, but I think the value of that word is probably the combination of, you can never do everything. And if you're trying to be a sole operator, it's such a lonely, difficult place where you just won't be as capable of making progress. Whereas if you're surrounded by people who are differently capable than you, then you can totally have them cover for you, and you can cover for them in all the spaces that you're different.
And that still leaves, this is not a company filled with extroverts, right? This still leaves room for the introvert. This still leaves room for a lot of work on your own, but it's understanding like your fellow work colleagues. It's understanding how to build teams, understanding how to work on the bits that are your superpowers and lean on others for other bits. So together doesn't literally mean kumbaya every lunch and those things, but it's really understanding that we can do better outputs together.
So we talked about today our ask, smart people with good intentions who get shit done, and what we feel is our job, tangible progress towards meaningful goals together. And it feels like those two are a pair that perhaps are a good description of what we're looking for in terms of who would work well in our culture, and what we think is our responsibility to provide if you were to come and work with us. I feel like as a tiny little final comment in the what have I missed zone, and I think you know what I'm going to say, but it's like, We are always looking for amazing people to come and work with us. And we think it's a great place to work. And so normally you can listen to this and not have to have like sponsored posts and, plugs and that sort of stuff, because you could just choose to go and buy our products or not. And this stuff is just there for you to enjoy. But like we have a tiny plug today, which is we are always looking to recruit amazing people.
Absolutely. And we have a careers page on our website. We advertise jobs on certain platforms, but also if it just feels like there's things you've heard or read about that really intrigue you, get in touch as well.
Please join us.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I think that's us.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. You can find details and relevant links in the show notes. If you feel like you're learning something here, perhaps subscribe on either Spotify or Apple. And if you have a chance, leave a review and let us know how we're going. Bye for now.